join me in a prayer? I pray now to the one who listens, asking that we may relax back into a power that is greater than us all, the sacred oneness that unites us, this mystery, a place of delight, of safety, of hope, of peace, of humility, and of joy. Amen.
Amen.
So for those who don't know me, my name is Darcie Dunlop. I'm not a pastor. I'm actually a marriage family therapist. And here I just want to speak from my place of equality, not authority. Today I'm one who talks, and there are many who are listening. And what I ask is that you listen from your own space and see if it resonates with you, with what you know already to be true in your heart. And maybe it will touch something inside of your own wisdom. Maybe it will illuminate something there that will support you in your own life. Because what is sacred is illuminated for each of us differently. You have your own biology, your own upbringing and experiences in life that have taught you who God is to you. Our beautiful ideas of spirituality, basically, who God is to us, well, they're here to help us have joy on this earth and to learn to love deeply ourselves and others and to live in grace with whatever we hold sacred. And in that love and grace, we learn to live in humility and equality, neither better than nor less than anyone else. These beliefs help me to live in peace when I am centered around them. Whatever we believe needs to work for that. And as long as our beliefs don't victimize others, we're allowed to have them. And whatever you believe is welcome here. So what about this parable? And we all know which guy we'd rather be. So here's what the Pharisee said, what Steve said. God, I thank you that I am not like other people, thieves, rogues, adulterers, or even like this tax collector. I fast twice a week. I give 1/10 of all my income. How rude. Who would do that? Stand in public, berate somebody else. I'm not like that. Or am I? Let's talk about how I feel about after watching the news. Or when I see the protesters for the other side. Or anytime I hear certain public people even open their mouth. Now I am upset and angry over the state of our country. Thank God that I am not like the senators that can't seem to have a voice of their own. Spineless jellyfish. They just let the madness continue. I write to my congressional representative. I hold signs. I send money. I pray for the peace of this nation. And I'm sure that God and Jesus both are on my side. Oops. I kind of do sound like them, like the Pharisee. Now this story can be a 2-for-1 if we let it, meaning we can relate with both of these guys. I'd like to see myself as the nice, humble tax collector, but also as the Pharisee, because with some people, some of the time, I do act like Pharisee. And while uncomfortable considering the state of our nation, I believe it's important to be able to identify with the Pharisee right now. And here's why. So let's switch over to politics for a minute. Studies from the past, this will not surprise anybody, studies from the past decade have shown that there's a correlation with the traits of authoritarianism, conservative beliefs, and social dominance, and the tendency to dehumanize groups other than themselves. No surprise there, speaking as the Pharisee. But here's the humbling part. An experiment by Dr. Paul Piff, a social psychologist at UCI, was published. He claims that both Democrats and Republicans engage in the behavior at roughly the same rate. 3 studies with a large number of participants spanning 4 years with 4 different measures found that members of each party are consistently willing to dehumanize members of the opposing party. Those in one party are willing to explicitly state that members of the opposing party are like animals, that they lack essential human traits, and that they're less evolved than members of their own political party. Less evolved. You know what else I'll tell you today? Yet while I may not say it out loud, sometimes I think it. And there he is, the Pharisee, right in my own body. And it's hurting our world. So I better change the subject. I think I'm safer talking about the 1%. I'm not rich. I have no idea what it feels like to have that type of money. Doesn't seem fair that if you have enough money, you tend to be healthier, happier, and you certainly get better health care. How is it that someone who works as hard as I do has such a hard time making ends meet? Who has all my money? I am definitely looking for someone to blame. Another published paper by Dr. Piff titled, Higher Social Class Predicts Increased Unethical Behavior. Again, no surprise there. The studies show the higher class is less ethical, more selfish, more insular, and less compassionate than other people. One experiment even showed them taking candy from a bowl of sweets designated for children. Who would do that?
Not me.
No. Piff says the rich are way more likely to prioritize their own self-interests above the interests of other people. It makes them more likely to exhibit characteristics that we would stereotypically associate with, and I quote, assholes. I quoted. It's okay to do it if it's in a quote. So there's the proof I'm looking for. You are unfair. You are exploiting me. Selfish, inbred, unethical, corrupted. There he is, the Pharisee, right inside of me. Okay, so here's the humbling part. Dr. Piff, again, conducted an experiment about 5 or 6 years ago called the Monopoly experiment. In this experiment, a flip of a coin determined who was going to be rich for that game. The rich received twice as much money at the beginning and throughout the game. They also were given 2 dice to roll, while the poor participant only received 1. So they get to go around go twice as many times getting their money. Well, soon in the game, the rich player begins to display dominant behavior, moving the pieces around the board loudly, smacking their hands on the table, and there was a bowl of pretzels, and the rich ate more pretzels than the poor. And he taunted them. And here I quote, putting someone in a role where they're more privileged and have more power in a game makes them behave like people who actually do have more power, more money, and more status. And here's the kicker. After the game, when asked why they won, most would talk about their own abilities, their own savvy. They forgot about the flip of the coin that made them wealthy in the first place. And most of us won't be surprised by this. Having money seems to decrease empathy, but that's not why I'm citing these experiments. The take-home point is that the people in the Monopoly game were assigned randomly. That means that if you or I had been the rich person, we are likely to have acted similarly to the others. That is not very comfortable. And I'd like to think I'd be different, but the people in the studies are just like me. They found themselves behaving poorly after randomly being selected as the privileged player. So when I look at this parable, I need to identify with the Pharisee. He is like me, and I am like him. We were both trained from birth to be exactly who we are. The Pharisee, in reality, has the same intrinsic worth as others, as do I, as do you, and even as the tax collector, but he was never taught that. He was taught that he was to be separate from and better than all the people he was scorning. And you don't have to read very far into the New Testament to find that Jesus had a problem with the beliefs and behaviors of the Pharisees. He had a problem with their hypocrisy. He also had a problem with the rules that were so rigid that practically no one, not even the Pharisee, could follow them. In Matthew, Jesus says, "Woe to you, scribes and Pharisees, you hypocrites! You lock the kingdom of heaven before human beings. You do not enter yourselves, and nor do you allow entrance to those trying to enter." The stories about Jesus show a fierceness to defend the marginalized. Jesus is the great equalizer. And Jesus was a wisdom teacher. The lofty will be brought down and the lowly will be lifted up. Maybe he was saying that we can meet in the middle. Worthiness. We are all worth the same, neither better than nor less than. My brother-in-law had a gun safe. He had all sorts of guns in there. He had an opinion. I had an opinion. Both of us had reasons for our opinions. And knowing this helps keep me from judgment. In order to understand this idea of worth, it's important to separate in our minds who we are from what we do. Who I am from my behaviors. Two different things. The reason we do the things we do is because of who we understand ourselves to be. The values and beliefs we've adopted over the years, influenced by our sense of physical and emotional safety, on how we grew up and the experiences we've had in our lives. This guy, the Pharisee, thought he was worthwhile because of all the great things that he did. He didn't realize that these didn't matter at all, that he was already worthy without doing all those things. However, his behavior could use some change. So now I hope we can identify as the Pharisee. We don't have to like it, but we own it. And this is in fact a good thing, because you cannot solve a problem that you do not own. You can only blame, judge, and criticize others, and perhaps make laws. So owning it is the first part in changing it. So now about the tax collector. They were known to be notorious thieves, and I believe we are to assume that he's suffering because he's come to understand that he is a sinner. Which means in the Gospels that he had made a mistake or had failed in his task. So what he does is what we all do when we do wrong and feel guilty. We feel remorse. And then we admit to it. And this is all we get of his story. But that's a good start. He's done the first two steps. We hope that he's going to continue with the next two steps, which are to make amends to the people that he's harmed, and then change. Because when we do these four things, what ends up happening is we become able to forgive ourselves. He has a belief in a forgiving God, which doesn't hurt. And when you believe you're forgiven by God, you have a much easier time forgiving yourself. Just like when we make amends to other people and they forgive us, we have a much easier time forgiving ourselves. The tax collector already knew that he was part of the problem. And in order for any lasting change to happen, we have to know that somehow we are part of the problem. So what do we do with this? For one, to accept that we have many places in our lives where we don't understand that we are part of the problem. When we don't get that, we put our energy into finding fault and blame. We do it at home, at work, in the car, in the grocery store, in my backyard, talking with my neighbor Gloria.
Wow,
about
salty.
The trees. It's our first energy, to blame. Something is wrong. It must be you. So here's a novel idea. Everyone is always doing the best they can. And that is just a true statement. We are always solving problems, perhaps different problems than the one we think, but solving problems nonetheless. I'm not saying it's always effective. I'm just saying that we're trying to solve a problem. So we're all doing the best we can, and we can do better. Both of these statements are true. Think of it. The last time you didn't do better. If you could have, wouldn't you have? But you didn't. Because you couldn't. In that time, in that place, with those people, with that learning and that energy, you couldn't. It is what it is. There will be consequences and rewards to whatever happened, and that is everyone's story. Not better than, not less than. What benefit is there to believe that I could have and just didn't? What benefit is there to believe that somebody else could have and just didn't? all it does is to poke at shame and to feel yet again like a failure or yet again like a victim. No one changes from shame, not in a lasting way. So instead of finding fault and blame with others or ourselves, when we are able, we become accountable, which is different. And we do the 4 steps that the tax collector did. We have remorse, we admit it, and we make it right. And then we look at the causes and conditions of our behavior and we make changes. It's so important for me to separate the idea of who I am from the ways of coping with the world. And it's very important to separate others from who they are and their ways of coping with the world. I am positive that the things we don't like about ourselves and others is only our ways of coping. It's not who we are inside, underneath all of that fear. I also believe that most of us have good intentions. You know about my brother-in-law and his gun safe. If you had asked him why he owns guns, he would say, because I want to protect me and my family. And if you ask me why I don't own guns, I would say because I want to protect me and my family. To look at the other and say that you are evil and you have evil intentions in your heart and you want to hurt people and you just want to be rich and you don't care about anyone is unfair and untrue. Intentions tend to be something we assume, and seeing into the hearts of others is way above my pay grade. So here I quote, "If only it were all so simple. If only there were evil people somewhere insidiously committing evil deeds, and it were necessary only to separate them from the rest of us and destroy them. But the line dividing good and evil cuts through the heart of every human being, and who is willing to destroy a piece of his own heart?" The point isn't to judge it. The point, according to the poet Auden, is to love your crooked neighbor with your own crooked heart. Just to see that we are all in this together. So we are a we. There is no them, and there is only an us. We are okay. Our behaviors could use some change, and that is the starting point. I want to look into the world to see people who are human, just like me. And what we need right now is unity. That is the problem we need to solve, and there are many behaviors going on right now that are destroying that. When I get right down in it, like the tax collector, where I'm remorseful and I'm coming from my true self, the one that isn't guarded and defending with all of my good deeds, the one that knows I have good deeds, but also the one that knows that I do things that aren't very good. And that's because I'm human, and that's okay, because we're all more alike than different. But our worthiness, my self-worth, does not come from my failures or my successes. That is much too fragile. I think that's why our feelings of worthlessness and worthiness fluctuate all the time, and that can't be right. When I know my worth in my heart and I know yours, that's where compassion comes from. That's where it's born, and that's where change comes from. How do I, strong like Jesus, use that passion not to vilify and dehumanize people, but to puzzle out the behaviors that need change, starting with me? I want to watch my speech, internal and external. I don't want to entertain it between my ears, and I definitely don't want to say it out loud, because I know for sure that that's not what love does. Love does not denigrate me, and it does not denigrate you. Next, I want to look toward intention to the best of my ability and assume positive intent unless proven untrue. Then we look at behavior to discover the change that we'd like to see. We're allowed to have our own ideas and beliefs about what will work. My brother-in-law and I have similar intention. However, there will be differences in how we want to solve the problem. We want to make change in the world, and it's important that we speak up, but we do it from a place of humility, where we're neither better than nor less than, after the soul searching, not a place of self-righteousness. When we see ourselves as like the world, not above the world, It's from that place we do the changing. We're then able to hear others in compassion and recognize the needs and the fears. From this place, we can be more fine-tuned in what we're trying to reconcile, and we approach in love instead of from attack. And when we do that, we can begin to see where the beliefs and ideas are different. We can see what is actually broken, and it's not a whole person. And it's not even the person. It's our defenses, born out of fear. We are not our defenses. We've built them for protection. By understanding and accepting our equality, our worth, we learn to look beyond them and grow out of the ones no longer needed into our true, whole, and beautiful selves. That's who we truly are. And I'd like to tell you one last story. It's about a monastery in Thailand. In 1957, a road was being built and the monastery had to move locations. Well, this monastery had a very beloved clay statue of the Buddha, and they wanted to move the statue to the new location. So they hired a crane to lift the Buddha. However, it was much heavier than it looked, and it cracked. So for fear of damaging it more, the crane operator stopped trying to move it. Later that evening, the main teacher took a flashlight. He went to survey the damage. And to his surprise, when he flashed the light in the crack, gold glinted back. The next morning, they chiseled away the clay to find a solid gold Buddha in the middle. And what they believe is that several hundred years earlier, the monks in the monastery were anticipating an attack by the Burmese army. So they covered the Buddha with several layers of clay to disguise it so it wouldn't be stolen. Unfortunately, all of the monks were killed. But their plan to camouflage the Buddha worked, and no one knew until that day. I love this story. Inside, we are all golden, beautiful, made in the image of the divine. However, life has splattered us with clay, blocking the image of who we really are. We find our worth not by a process of addition. We are already worthy. We find it by a process of subtraction, by scraping away all of the mistaken ideas of our brokenness and spreading that message with the world. Beautifully and wonderfully human. Our behaviors could use some change, all of us, but there is no them. There is only us, and we are all beloved as we are. Amen.
Thank you.